Hello, my name is AJ Farrar, and I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and some skills that I have picked up in the last couple of years that I've spent at University of the Pacific. So I think that the first and most sort of important skill that anybody really learns in higher education is the ability to take a problem and look at it from a bunch of different angles. So to incorporate sort of the broad ideas that you've looked at in a bunch of different classes that you've looked at in like a hydrogeology class and a history class and a philosophy class, and to take those things and to put them into different contexts and to look at, say, an ecological problem through the context of history. A really good sort of example, but the opposite direction. I worked on a project last year that was looking at the history of an invasive species in the state of California, the white garden snail, Phoeba pisana. And I wanted to look at it not sort of from a historical lens, or at least not entirely from a historical lens. So I made a history of this snail in the state of California, looking at sort of the biology of this snail, what made it such a really terrible invasive species in the state. And then I looked at sort of ecological things, like what allowed it to get here, and it ended up being a lot of issues with soil and drought, and how did the efforts to get rid of it affect the ecology of the area and the economics of the area, and to sort of take that problem and look at it from all of these different sides. Another more recent example, I wrote up with two of my peers a restoration plan for an area of the Calaveras River, where sort of the basis of it was it's a biological problem, it's an ecosystem sort of problem, that this ecosystem has been heavily altered by human use, and we're trying to figure out a way to make it a little bit better. But we looked at it married to this sort of social issue of how do you convince people to care about an area of land that they usually just sort of walk over and sort of grimace at. So we looked a lot into sort of psychology, that how do you make a space useful to people, or how do you make a space welcoming to people? And we sort of created this plan that was sort of optimized towards sort of the habitat that was destroyed and doesn't exist right now, but also for what people wanted to do with that space. Like, is there a way to make this both habitat that can be used by animals, but also a space that people can be happy to use and that they can feel attached to, and that they can like look at and want to do something to make that a better place, which is sort of this long-running problem in the world, that how do we convince people to make the areas around them better, rather than just sort of throwing their garbage over the sides of moving cars. So then once you sort of have the ability or the capacity to look at a problem from these different angles and to look at like why things are the way they are in a broader context, not just in the sort of obvious context, but sort of the interconnected context that everything sort of is in, because nothing really exists in a vacuum, I think that the next most important thing is evidence-based problem solving, the scientific method. Like once you break it up and you look at your sort of issue, whether it's like, I need to fix this horrible thing that's happening, or if it's, I want to know more about this, you can sort of break it down and start looking for a solution that sort of satisfies the real reality of your problem. So we call it the scientific method, but I don't really think that it's necessarily applicable only to the sciences. That I think the ability to take a problem, propose a solution for it, to gather evidence and prove one way or another whether or not that is a solution that solves the problem, I think is useful sort of in all walks of life, whether it's like in a history class trying to prove some point about the past, or if it's looking at an ophiolite and trying to figure out what some part of its history and alteration, or you're just trying to come up with like a meaningful, well thought out way to like hold up your laundry or something, that it's useful and really sort of important to be able to like be in the mindset that you can't just come up with the solution. You need to prove that that solution works, and in a way that somebody else could come to the same conclusion, whether or not they necessarily came into it with that same conclusion. And it's just sort of an invaluable thing to have in your arsenal as a way to look at the world and look at your day-to-day life and sort of make something of it.